You know, we've had a lot of interesting conversations, Lauren, and we will more about how the Democrats fell short, what happened, where Democrats need to dig deep and regroup. But moving forward, what does the fight for women look like now for women's rights, women's health care, women's freedom, and that within how the Democratic Party moves forward?
Yeah, well, there were silver linings in Tuesday's results. I mean, 7 states passed abortion referendums, even where they voted for Trump in those same states, which, you know, we had talked about before and sort of like scratched our head, like, could that happen?
It actually shows that tangible issues did break through.
Absolutely.
And so when you're talking about fascism and autocracy and these issues that are too difficult to comprehend when you're working every day and you're not, it doesn't impact you. It's the tangible issues, how women were impacted physically by Trump's first term, and then the price of, you know, eggs.
Right. I mean, there's always been this conventional wisdom that sometimes when people think someone's going to win, they'll like vote, you know, they vote for a president of one party and then try to check their power by voting for electeds. In this case, it seems like voters did that with those referendums, right? The referendums, in a sense, like a check on whatever Trump might do or what his party might do to push further abortion restrictions. And I think we're going to keep seeing those. I mean, the battle for America, and I've been saying this here for years, is through the states. I mean, many of the state legislatures hold the keys to American freedoms, and I think people are newly understanding that in different ways. Notably in Pennsylvania, you know, where we had this shocking, you know, sort of sweep, Bob Casey losing, you know, all of this. The Pennsylvania state legislature remained Democratic, and that just was called last night. So
that race with Casey is not called,
and it's
by
not
NBC
called.
Yet,
but
I hear I don't think they thought it was going to be close.
They didn't think it was really close. And fair enough that it's not called. Several races that are still not called. Look, I wanted to say this because I've been thinking about it so much this week that I think really the dividing line, I've been wrong about a bunch of things, and I think we're all kind of taking stock of what we got wrong. I think the numbers turned out that women, of course, did vote for Trump in huge numbers, but really, like, the big dividing line, these gender lines are very real, but so is the education divide. And I think that's one of these places where Democrats, to me, it's less about the working class, not working class, and more about education and the fact that college is not accessible for millions of Americans, and yet we set that up as the ultimate bar of success. And then
same with home ownership.
Well, home ownership. But you know what happened on college campuses this year? I mean, think about that. You can't. So you're supposed to want me to aspire to this thing I can't afford. That's $90,000 a year, and then I'm going to get there, and I'm going to have to deal with like this crazy sort of backlash to dissent. You know, I think all of that is part of the factors here. But we got to figure out what happened. Why the men in this country are so angry and so willing to sign on for something that is against the interests of the women in their lives.
Jen Psaki, your thoughts?
I mean, I think I've also been reflecting on all of the things that the party got wrong. And I think it's an important moment to reflect and be humble about that and also be curious as to why. And, you know, I think one of the things that Lauren just mentioned and you just responded to, Mika, we completely misread abortion politics in this country. And what I mean by that is not that it isn't an issue that people deeply care about. They clearly do. Obviously, those 7 referendum are an example of that. But millions of people in this country voted for Donald Trump, a person who put in place the people on the Supreme Court who overturned abortion rights and also voted to protect abortion rights. That was a huge misread. The other thing I think that Democrats and people who voted for Harris and are scared about Trump should just be sober about and curious about is not just why did people move toward Trump, but why did Democrats and people who had been with the party for some time not come out and turn out for Kamala Harris and not turn out for the Democrats. There were many headwinds here. There is sexism. There's racism. All of that is true. But I also think there is a real question I hope people start looking at about who people are listening to. In my view, there was an over-listening to and an over-lifting up of people who left Trump, not people who left the Democratic Party. The people who left the Democratic Party are the people who are going to win in the future. The people who left Trump, the never-Trumpers, who have important voices and that is not the winning coalition. And I think that is a takeaway. And the last thing I'll say, because I've been thinking about this a lot, is the part of that piece, the who you're listening to, is also this argument, you just touched on this, Mika, about fascism. Fascism and the threat of democracy is a huge issue in this country. It's one that should be talked about. Journalists should talk about it. People should dig into it. It is not a good closing message to reach to the masses of the country. People don't relate to it. It's not understandable. And I think that, I hope, is a lesson. But okay, I said that was the last thing. There's a last thing because I've thought about this a lot.
I want to know.
Is this. There are moments, I know Joe was talking about this earlier. I worked for John Kerry when he lost to President Bush. That was a real, how did that happen moment. I then worked for the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee the next cycle for Rahm Emanuel when the Democrats won back the House, right? That was 2 years later. And then I worked for Barack Obama, who no one would have bet was going to be the next nominee or the next president after George W. Bush. As dark as people feel, as fearful as people feel, as lost as they feel, a vacuum is also an opportunity to rethink, to listen, to be curious, to be humble. And I think in this darkness people are feeling, I'm hopeful that's part of it. Someone's going to emerge. 10 people will emerge. That's what we will also see in the months ahead.
I love what you just said, because I'm a huge believer in humility, in victory, and humility in defeat. Yeah. In both cases, we've all heard the saying: you're never as good as people say you are, or never as bad as people say you are. So when you win, I will say, if Harris had won the race, I would be lecturing Democrats that they needed to be humble. They needed to keep their heads down. They needed to bring the country together. In defeat, humility to say, how did we get so disconnected? But Jen, I want to follow up on something you said, because what Democrats need to be asking is, why did so many people stay home and not vote? Get two numbers. First number is 12 million less people voted for Kamala Harris than Joe Biden. But here's the kicker. Are you ready for this? Donald Trump got 4 million votes less, Jen. 4 million votes less this year than he got 4 years ago. If Democrats had turned out, and independents and Republicans, if they had a message, and by the way, this is so, I'm going to say it right here, this is such a shared defeat. Anybody looking at Kamala Harris or Jen O'Malley Dillon or David Plouffe are looking in the wrong direction. They need to look in the mirror and look at the Democratic Party that has been offending working class Americans for 30 years now, running them off for 30 years now. And Jen, how shocking is it that, again, Donald Trump got 4 million votes less, and now Democrats are going, oh my gosh, this is the greatest landslide of all time. How did it happen? It happened because they stayed home. Because a lot of voters that voted for her last time stayed home. We can look, forgive me for going on, but this is an important point. We can look at Hispanics and go, oh my God, how many Hispanics voted for Donald Trump? And oh my God, how many black men voted for Donald Trump? He still got 4 million less votes in 2024 than he got in 2020. So they could have easily made that up. But they didn't come out and vote in what many of us thought was the most important election of our lifetime.
No doubt. I will just say, just for people who are hyperventilating at home, and a hyperventilation a little bit is good in this moment, all the votes are not counted yet, so those gaps will narrow a bit. But I think, Joe, one, and for anybody out there who's going to say there were headwinds, there were, right? Kamala Harris made up a lot of ground that wouldn't have been the case a couple of months ago if there hadn't been a change at the top of the ticket. But I think your point is exactly the one people should be thinking about here. This was not a vote because Donald Trump has won over 10 million more votes than he did 4 years ago. There were people who did not feel moved, motivated, connected to the Democratic Party. And I've seen, and you played a lot of these people just a few minutes ago, there's a lot of diagnosing out there of what happened here. It's too progressive. It's too this. It's too that. Woke, this and that. Look, everybody needs to be a little bit more humble than all of those diagnoses right now, because young people didn't turn out, progressives didn't turn out, people who maybe should have found it to be appealing, the messaging that is left-leaning, as some of those critics are saying. And to me, what is most appealing to me are the elected officials, the governors, people who are saying, we have to start listening to what people are saying. Why do they feel disconnected? Why can't the party that has the policies that should help working people, help non-college educated voters, not connect? It's not a problem with the product necessarily. It's a problem with how it is being sold. It is a problem with how it's being connected. And the other thing is, look, I'm a college educated white woman, clearly, right? The message is geared too much toward me. Mm-hmm. It is geared toward me. It is not geared toward a mass of the public. And that is a moment to really be clear-eyed about. I do think, though, for people who are feeling hopeless and powerless in this moment, you are not powerless. And that's why I wanted to mention the working when the Democrats flipped the House in 2006, when Barack Obama emerged. You're not powerless. When Donald Trump was elected, he said he was going to get rid of the ACA. You know what happened? People got active. They called their members of Congress. They went to meetings. They said, absolutely not. You cannot take away my health insurance. And guess what? It didn't happen. Every fight will not be won, but nobody's powerless sitting on their couch right now. There is a lot to happen. There's a lot of people to get excited about. There are people who are going to emerge we're not even talking about right now. So as much as there needs to be reflection, there is also power in this moment, too.